Commander Vextal leaned back in his command chair, watching the small blue planet spin slowly on his main screen. Earth looked so peaceful from here, with its white clouds swirling over green and brown continents. But looks could be deceiving. He had learned that lesson 47 times before. "Sir, initial scans are complete," reported his navigation officer, a thin creature with 6 arms and silver skin. "The planet shows all the usual signs of a primitive civilization: chemical-based rockets, basic satellite networks, and according to our intercepted communications, they can't even agree on simple trade agreements." Vextal nodded. It was always the same story. Every species the Empire encountered followed predictable patterns. First they would discover fire, then metals. Then they would split into competing groups, fighting over resources, while barely managing to leave their home planet. By the time they developed basic space travel, they were usually so busy fighting each other that they never saw the Empire coming. "What's their current technology level?" Vextal asked, already knowing the answer would be disappointing. "Barely past nuclear fission, sir. They've managed to put a few small stations in orbit around their planet, and they have some mining operations on their moon. Nothing that could threaten even our oldest ships." The officer paused, checking his readings again. "Actually, sir, they seem to be going backwards in some areas. Their space program was more active 50 years ago than it is now." Vextal smiled. That was even better news. A species in decline would offer even less resistance than usual. He had seen it before with the Corvani people 3 systems over. They had been so busy fighting internal wars that they barely noticed the Empire's arrival until it was too late. "Begin standard first contact protocol," Vextal ordered. "Send the usual message." Down on Earth, in a small observatory outside Seoul, Professor Kim Dae-ho was having trouble sleeping. He had been tracking unusual energy readings for the past week, signals coming from the outer edge of their solar system that didn't match anything in his databases. The readings were faint but consistent, and they were getting stronger. Kim had spent 30 years studying space, looking for signs of life beyond Earth. Most of his colleagues thought he was wasting his time, but Kim knew better. The universe was too big and too old for humans to be alone. Somewhere out there, other civilizations had to exist. He just hoped they would be friendly when they finally made contact. The radio crackled to life at exactly midnight. Kim jumped, nearly spilling his coffee across his computer keyboard. The voice that came through the speakers was mechanical, clearly translated by some kind of computer system. "People of Earth, you are now subjects of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. Your primitive civilization has been selected for integration into our greater society. You will submit to imperial rule and provide resources as directed. Resistance will result in the complete destruction of your species. You have 24 hours to signal your acceptance. Failure to comply will be considered an act of war." Kim sat frozen for several seconds, his coffee growing cold in his hands. This was it. This was what he had been waiting for his entire career. But instead of the peaceful first contact he had always imagined, this sounded more like a declaration of war. He quickly started recording everything, checking and double-checking his equipment to make sure the signal was real. The energy signature matched the readings he had been tracking, and the signal was coming from multiple points around their solar system. This wasn't some elaborate hoax or science fiction movie publicity stunt. This was real. Within an hour, Kim was on the phone with every scientist, military official, and government contact he could reach. Most of them hung up on him or dismissed his claims as fantasy, but a few listened. A few understood that the readings he was showing them meant Earth was no longer alone in the universe. In government buildings around the world, emergency meetings were called. Some leaders wanted to ignore the message completely. Others wanted to prepare for war. A few suggested trying to negotiate. But buried deep beneath Kim's observatory, in a bunker that most people didn't know existed, older protocols were being activated, protocols that had been waiting for exactly this moment for over 50 years. Park Min-soo sat in his small apartment in Busan, surrounded by radio equipment that most people would consider junk. Old vacuum tubes glowed softly in the dim light, and cables snaked across every surface like electronic vines. At 73 years old, Park had been working with radios longer than most people had been alive. His neighbors thought he was just a harmless old man who talked to strangers around the world as a hobby. They had no idea how wrong they were. 24 hours had passed since the alien message arrived. Park had been monitoring government communications all day, listening to politicians argue and military leaders debate. Some wanted to surrender immediately. Others wanted to fight with weapons they didn't have. A few suggested trying to hide and hope the aliens would go away. But Park knew better. He had been waiting for this day since he was a young soldier, back when the world was very different. Back when certain projects were buried so deep that even the people working on them forgot they existed. His fingers moved across the radio controls with practiced ease. The equipment looked ancient, but the modifications hidden inside were anything but primitive. Park had spent decades upgrading and improving the systems, following blueprints that officially never existed. At exactly midnight, 24 hours after the first alien message, Park pressed the transmission button. His response went out on every radio frequency simultaneously, bouncing off satellites, radio towers, and relay stations around the globe. The signal was so perfectly coordinated that it reached every corner of Earth at the same instant. No. Leave now. 2 words. Simple. Direct and absolutely final. Up in space, Commander Vextal stared at his communication screens in confusion. His technical officers were running diagnostics, checking and rechecking their equipment. The human response should have been impossible with their primitive technology. "Sir, we're detecting some kind of coordinated transmission network," reported his communications specialist. "It's like their entire planet is connected by a single system, but our scans show they barely have basic radio technology." "How are they doing this?" Vextal demanded. "Their satellites are ancient, their ground stations are scattered and unorganized. There's no way they could coordinate a planet-wide broadcast with that equipment." His science officer looked up from her console, confusion clear on her face. "Sir, the signal didn't come from their government centers or military bases. It originated from a residential area in one of their smaller cities. Just some old human in an apartment." Vextal felt a small chill run down his spine. In 47 previous conquests, he had never encountered anything like this. Most species either begged for mercy or launched desperate, uncoordinated attacks. They never responded with such calm certainty, and they definitely never managed planet-wide coordination from a single civilian location. "Maybe they're more advanced than our initial scans suggested," suggested his tactical officer. "Could they have been hiding their true capabilities?" "Impossible," Vextal replied, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We've been monitoring their communications for months. They're barely past nuclear technology. They can't even unite their own planet politically. There's no way they could be hiding advanced technology from our sensors." But even as he said it, doubt was creeping into his mind. The human response had been too quick, too coordinated, too confident. It felt less like the desperate reaction of a primitive species, and more like the calm response of someone who had been expecting this conversation. "Orders, sir?" asked his navigation officer. Vextal straightened in his command chair, pushing away his doubts. The Empire had conquered 47 civilizations. Whatever tricks these humans thought they had, it wouldn't be enough to stop the might of the Imperial fleet. "Begin the advance. Standard formation. All ships maintain full power to shields and weapons." He paused, looking at the small blue planet on his screen. "These humans will learn the same lesson as all the others. Resistance is futile." The Imperial fleet began moving forward, their massive ships gliding silently through space toward Earth. Their energy shields hummed with power, ready to deflect any primitive weapons the humans might throw at them. Their plasma cannons charged, preparing to demonstrate the Empire's overwhelming superiority. But as they crossed Neptune's orbit, something strange began happening. Their sensors started picking up energy readings that didn't match their intelligence reports. Power signatures that seemed to be coming from all over the solar system, from places where nothing should exist. Commander Vextal frowned at his displays. According to their scans, there were energy sources on Mars, in the asteroid belt, and around Jupiter. But that was impossible. The humans barely had a presence on their own moon. How could they have installations throughout their solar system? "Sir," his sensor operator called out, voice tight with concern. "I'm detecting massive power buildups throughout the system. These readings are off the charts." For the first time in his long military career, Commander Vextal began to wonder if the Empire had made a terrible mistake. Captain Lee So-jin had been living underground for 3 years, and she was getting tired of artificial sunlight. The Lunar Command Center was comfortable enough with its recycled air and carefully controlled temperature, but nothing could replace the feeling of real wind on her face. Still, today made all those years of waiting worthwhile. She watched the Imperial fleet approach on her main screen, their ships moving in perfect formation like they owned the universe. In a way, they did. 47 worlds had fallen to these same ships, and now they expected Earth to be number 48. They were in for a surprise. "All stations, this is Lunar Command," Lee spoke into her headset. "Operation Sunrise is now active. I repeat, Operation Sunrise is active." Around her, dozens of technicians began flipping switches and activating systems that had been dormant for decades. The command center hummed with energy as massive computers came online, their screens lighting up with targeting data and trajectory calculations. Above them, on the moon's surface, the ground began to split open. What had looked like ordinary mining equipment for the past 50 years suddenly revealed its true purpose. Massive railgun arrays rose from hidden bunkers, their long barrels pointing toward the approaching alien fleet. These weren't the primitive chemical rockets that Earth had been using for decades. These were magnetic accelerators capable of launching tungsten projectiles at speeds that would make bullets look like thrown rocks. "Railguns online," reported her weapons officer. "All systems showing green. We have clear targeting solutions on the lead ships." Lee nodded but didn't give the order to fire yet. The plan required perfect timing and the other stations weren't ready. She switched her communication system to the Mars channel. "Red Station, this is Lunar Command. What's your status?" Colonel Park Ji-woo's voice crackled through from Mars, slightly delayed by the distance between the planets. "Lunar Command, Red. Station is ready. Opening hangar doors now." On Mars, what had appeared to be simple research stations for the past 30 years were transforming. Massive doors slid open in the planet's surface, revealing defense platforms that had been built, in secret, piece by piece, under the cover of legitimate scientific missions. The platforms rose into the thin Martian atmosphere, their weapon systems coming online with deadly precision. Park Ji-woo watched his screens as his crews ran through final system checks. Unlike Earth's fake primitive technology, these platforms used energy weapons that could slice through asteroids like butter. The Empire's ships had never faced anything like them. "All platforms ready," he reported back to Lunar Command. "Waiting for your signal." In the asteroid belt, Dr. Cho Hai-min was having the time of her life. For 20 years, she had been working as a mining coordinator, directing automated drones to collect valuable minerals from the countless rocks floating between Mars and Jupiter. It had been boring, repetitive work that most people considered a dead-end job. But today, those same mining drones became the most dangerous swarm in human history. "Redirecting cargo loads," she announced to her small crew aboard the mining station. "Switching all drones to combat configuration." Throughout the asteroid belt, thousands of mining drones received new instructions. Instead of collecting rare metals, they began gathering the largest, densest rocks they could find. Their cargo holds, designed to carry tons of raw materials, were now loaded with makeshift projectiles. Each drone became a guided missile, ready to accelerate its rocky payload toward any target that threatened Earth. But the real surprise was waiting near Jupiter. Admiral Song Tae-hyun stood on the bridge of the SNV Incheon, humanity's first truly advanced starship. For 15 years, he had been commanding what everyone believed was a gas mining operation around Jupiter. The massive facilities floating in Jupiter's upper atmosphere did collect hydrogen and helium, but that was just their cover story. Their real purpose was building ships that used technology the Empire had never seen before. "All ships, prepare to decloak," Song ordered. "It's time to show our guests what real space technology looks like." Around Jupiter, space itself seemed to ripple and bend. What had appeared to be empty vacuum suddenly filled with sleek, dark vessels that seemed to exist halfway between reality and somewhere else. These ships didn't just travel through space like the Empire's vessels. They folded space around themselves, moving by bending the universe rather than pushing through it. The Empire's sensors went crazy, trying to track ships that kept appearing and disappearing, phasing in and out of normal space like ghosts. Their targeting computers couldn't lock onto vessels that weren't always completely there. Commander Vextal stared at his displays in growing horror. Every scan his ships made revealed new surprises. What had looked like a primitive, divided civilization was actually a carefully coordinated defense network that spanned their entire solar system. The humans hadn't been fighting among themselves for the past 50 years. They had been preparing for war against an enemy they knew would eventually come. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, voice shaking, "we're detecting massive energy. Build-ups at multiple locations. Lunar surface, Mars orbit, asteroid belt and Jupiter space. Whatever they're planning to do, it's going to happen soon." Vextal realized with growing dread that the Empire hadn't found another easy conquest. They had walked into a trap that had been 50 years in the making, set by a species that had been pretending to be primitive while secretly developing weapons that defied everything the Empire thought they knew about technology. The humans hadn't been unprepared for this day. They had been waiting for it. The first Imperial ship to die was the INV Dominator, a massive cruiser that had participated in the conquest of 12 different worlds. Commander Vextal watched in horror as tungsten projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds by the lunar railguns, punched straight through its energy shields like they weren't even there. The Dominator's shields had been designed to deflect plasma beams and particle weapons, the standard armaments of every spacefaring civilization the Empire had encountered, but nobody had prepared them for solid chunks of metal traveling at nearly the speed of light. The projectiles hit with so much force that they didn't just damage the ship, they went completely through it, leaving perfectly round holes that vented atmosphere and crew into the vacuum of space. "Shields are useless!" screamed the Dominator's captain over the communication channel. "The projectiles are passing right through our defensive barriers." More ships began dying as the hidden defense platforms throughout the solar system opened fire. The Martian energy weapons carved through Imperial hulls like hot knives through butter, while swarms of mining drones crashed into the fleet, carrying payloads of dense asteroids. Each impact was like being hit by a small moon traveling at tremendous speed. But the worst surprise came from the human ships themselves. Captain Yun Da-un commanded the SNV Busan, one of the new phase drive vessels that had been secretly constructed near Jupiter. Unlike the Imperial ships that had to travel through normal space, her vessel could fold reality around itself, appearing and disappearing at will. "All units begin attack pattern Sigma," she ordered her strike force. "Remember, they can't hit what they can't see." The Busan materialized directly above an Imperial destroyer, fired a full spread of kinetic torpedoes into its unprotected dorsal section, then vanished again before the enemy could return fire. Seconds later, it reappeared behind a different ship, repeating the deadly dance. Commander Vextal's tactical officer was frantically trying to track the human vessels, but his targeting computers couldn't lock onto ships that kept phasing in and out of existence. "Sir, their ships aren't following normal physics. They're appearing inside our formation, attacking then disappearing before we can respond." "How is that possible?" Vextal demanded. "No species has ever developed that kind of technology." "I don't know, sir. Our science division said phase drive. Technology was theoretical at best. It would require understanding of dimensional mechanics that takes civilizations thousands of years to develop." Vextal was beginning to understand the horrible truth. Humanity hadn't spent the last 50 years fighting primitive wars among themselves. They had been working together in secret, developing weapons and technology specifically designed to defeat the Empire. Every intelligence report had been wrong. Every assumption had been a lie. The humans had been watching and listening to Imperial communications for decades, studying how the Empire conquered other worlds, analyzing their tactics and their technology. While pretending to be a divided, backward species, still struggling with basic space travel, they had been building the most advanced military force the galaxy had ever seen. "Sir?" his communications officer called out. I'm intercepting human military transmissions. They're speaking in perfect Imperial Standard. Vextal felt his blood turn cold. Imperial Standard was the Empire's military language, used only by high-ranking officers and intelligence personnel. How could primitive humans know it? Put it on speakers, he ordered. The bridge filled with clear professional voices speaking flawless Imperial Standard as human commanders coordinated their attack. They knew every Imperial ship class, every weapon system, every tactical doctrine. They spoke like they had been studying Imperial military procedures for their entire lives. Because they had. Fleet Command, this is Strike Leader Yoon. Enemy formation is breaking apart. Request permission to begin boarding operations on surviving. Command vessels. Permission granted, Strike Leader. Boarding teams are standing by. Vextal realized with growing terror that the humans weren't just defending themselves. They were systematically dismantling his entire fleet with surgical precision, keeping certain ships intact for specific purposes. This wasn't a desperate last stand by a primitive species. This was a carefully planned military operation, executed by forces that understood Imperial tactics better than some Imperial officers. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted less than 2 hours. Ship after ship of the once mighty Imperial fleet was either destroyed or disabled, until only Vextal's flagship remained. Even that was surrounded by human vessels that flickered in and out of normal space like deadly phantoms. "Sir, we're being boarded," reported his security chief. "Human soldiers have somehow materialized directly inside our hull. They're cutting through our blast doors like they're made of paper." Vextal slumped in his command chair, finally understanding the magnitude of his mistake. The Empire had sent a conquest fleet to attack what they thought was a primitive world. Instead, they had walked into a trap set by the most advanced military force in the galaxy. The bridge doors exploded inward, and human soldiers in advanced combat armor stormed in. Their leader, a young woman with lieutenant's stripes, removed her helmet and looked directly at Vextal. "Commander Vextal of the Zephyrian Empire," Lieutenant Kim Hanul said in perfect Imperial Standard, "you are now a prisoner of war. Your fleet has been destroyed, your crews have surrendered, and your Empire's expansion has officially ended." Vextal stared at her in shock. "How long have you been planning this?" Kim Hanul smiled grimly. "Ever since we intercepted your first communications 53 years ago. We've been listening to your Empire's radio chatter for decades, learning your language, studying your tactics, and preparing for the day you would finally notice Earth. But your world appeared so primitive, so divided." "That was the point," Kim replied. "We wanted you to underestimate us. We wanted you to think we were just another easy conquest. While your scouts were watching our fake chemical rockets and staged political conflicts, our real scientists were developing technology that your Empire never dreamed possible." The last thing Commander Vextal saw before losing consciousness was the sight of human soldiers efficiently securing his bridge, their movements coordinated and professional, like they had done this 1,000 times before. The Imperial transport. Ship Mercy drifted through space, its engines barely functional, and its hull scarred by the battle that had destroyed the rest of the fleet. It was the only ship the humans had allowed to survive, and the 37 crew members aboard knew exactly why they were still alive. They were messengers, carrying news of humanity's power back to the Empire. Captain Zorith, the ship's commander, had never felt so small. 3 days ago he had been part of the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Now he was a prisoner being sent home with his tail between his legs, completely dependent on human mercy for his survival. The humans had been surprisingly kind to the survivors. They provided medical care for the wounded, food for the hungry, and even repaired the Mercy's engines enough to make the journey home. But their kindness made the defeat somehow worse. The Empire ruled through fear and intimidation, crushing anyone who opposed them. These humans had destroyed an entire Imperial fleet, then offered aid to their enemies. "Sir," called his navigation officer, "we're receiving a transmission. The humans want to speak with us." Zorith straightened his uniform and tried to look dignified, though he felt anything but. "Put them through." The main screen flickered to life, showing not a military commander or government official, but an old man in simple farming clothes. He looked like he could be anyone's grandfather. with weathered hands and kind eyes. He was sitting in what appeared to be a modest farmhouse kitchen, with sunlight streaming through windows that showed fields of grain swaying in the breeze. "Good morning," the old man said in perfect imperial standard. "I am Nam In-ho. I believe we need to talk." Zorith had expected to face some kind of supreme military commander or powerful politician. This ordinary-looking farmer was not what he had prepared for. You're in charge of Earth's military." Nam In-ho chuckled softly. "I'm in charge of much more than that, Captain Zorith. I've been preparing for this conversation for most of my life. While the rest of the galaxy thought I was just growing rice and vegetables, the old man's voice was gentle, but there was something in his eyes that made Zorith's blood run cold. This wasn't just some random farmer. This was someone who had planned and executed the complete destruction of an Imperial fleet while drinking tea in his kitchen. "Your empire sent us one warning, as is proper between civilized peoples," Nam In-ho continued. "Submit or die. You said, we chose a third option that your empire never considered. We chose to protect ourselves and others." Zorith found his voice. "Our fleet was the most powerful force in this sector of the galaxy. How did you destroy us so easily?" "Because we've been watching you for 50 years, Nam In-ho replied calmly. "Every world you conquered, every battle you fought, every tactical decision you made. We studied all of it. We learned your strengths and your weaknesses. Most importantly, we learned that your empire rules through fear, not respect." The old man stood up and walked to his window, looking out at his peaceful farm. "Do you know what we found when we intercepted your communications all those years ago? We found records of 47 conquered worlds, billions of people living under Imperial rule, providing resources and labor while their own cultures died. Those worlds benefit from Imperial protection and order," Zorith said, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Nam In-ho turned back to face the screen, and his kind expression hardened. "Protection from what? Order for whose benefit? Your empire doesn't protect anyone, Captain. It consumes civilizations and leaves nothing but empty shells behind." The old man walked back to his chair and sat down, his movements slow and deliberate. "That ends today. Every world your empire has conquered is now under humanity's protection. Every species you've enslaved will be free. Your expansion stops here, and your retreat begins now." "You can't possibly defend 47 different worlds," Zorith protested. "Your fleet would be spread too thin." "Our fleet is larger than you imagine," Nam In-ho said with a slight smile. "What you saw at Earth was just our defensive force. Our liberation fleets are already on their way to your conquered worlds. By the time you reach Imperial space, half of your former subjects will be free." As if to prove his point, the Mercy's sensors began detecting massive energy signatures all around them. Human ships decloaked one by one, revealing a fleet that dwarfed anything the Empire had ever assembled. Sleek vessels that bent space around themselves filled the viewscreen, their hulls glowing with energy that seemed to come from dimensions beyond normal space. "This is impossible," Zorith whispered. "Where did all these ships come from?" "Jupiter system has very good construction facilities," Nam In-ho replied casually. "We've been building ships for decades, while your scouts thought we were just mining." Gas. "Every world you conquered gave us more reason to build faster." The old man leaned forward, his expression becoming serious. "Captain Zorith, I want you to deliver a message to your emperor. Tell him that humanity offers the Empire one chance to withdraw peacefully from all conquered territories. Your people can return to your home system and live in peace. But the age of Imperial expansion is over. And if the Empire refuses," Nam In-ho's smile disappeared completely. "Then your Empire will face what your fleet faced, but on a much larger scale. We have the technology, the resources, and most importantly, the will to free every oppressed world in this galaxy. The choice is yours." The transmission ended, leaving Zorith staring at a blank screen. Around his crippled ship, the human liberation fleet began moving toward Imperial space, their ships disappearing into folded space as they began the greatest military campaign in galactic history. As the Mercy limped toward home, Zorith realized he was witnessing the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Empire had ruled the galaxy through fear and strength. But humanity offered something the Empire never could: hope. Behind them, Earth's hidden fleets continued their deployment, carrying liberation to worlds that had almost forgotten what freedom meant. The galaxy's new protectors had finally revealed themselves, and nothing would ever be the same again.